Junior observer Lyra traced a perfectly straight line on her data slate. This was a habit born from the axiom concordance's obsession with order. The universe, according to every axiom she had ever learned, was a place of predictable patterns. Chaos was simply a pattern not yet fully calculated. From her station aboard the Oracle, a deep space listening post disguised as a rogue asteroid, her sole purpose was to observe these patterns. For 3 cycles, this sector, designated 734 Delta, had been a model of galactic monotony. Then, the anomaly appeared. It wasn't a gravitational shift or a stellar flare. It was a tear in the fabric of spacetime, a violent rip from which 3 vessels emerged. They were jagged and brutally asymmetrical. Their hulls were a chaotic mess of spikes and pitted plates that seemed to absorb light itself. Scourge. Lyra's 4 hearts picked up their rhythm in a cascade of controlled beats. She had only seen them in simulations. The Void Claws, a Category 5 predatory swarm, driven by hive mind instinct and a rapacious hunger for resources. Their logic was simple, brutal, and, to the concordance, ultimately predictable. High Arbiter. Valerius glided into the observation chamber. His crystalline form pulsed with a serene, condescending light. His approach was silent, a deliberate display of superiority. Report, Junior Observer. His voice was a series of perfectly modulated chimes, a sound that conveyed information without the vulgarity of emotion. Scourge vessels detected. High Arbiter, Lyra reported. Her own voice was flat and formal, betraying none of her inner fascination. 3 destroyers. Vector analysis indicates they are targeting the primordial outpost in orbit of the 6th planet. Valerius turned one of his many facets toward the main holographic display. Not primordial, Lyra. The Terrans achieved crude interplanetary travel 1.2 standard cycles ago. They are a Category 3 primordial species, barely sentient by concordance metrics. He made a gesture, and the display zoomed in on a fragile-looking structure orbiting the immense, ringed gas giant, Saturn, the Titan Helios relay station. It looked like a child's toy, a haphazard collection of cylinders and flimsy solar arrays. This is a fortunate confluence of events, Valerius chimed. Our understanding of Scourge swarm tactics is based on incomplete data sets. This will provide an excellent opportunity to observe their methods against a soft target, an uncontrolled variable. The Terrans are a variable? Lyra asked, a hint of curiosity coloring her tone before she could suppress it. All life is a variable until its axioms are fully understood, Valerius corrected gently. It was the intellectual equivalent of a pat on the head. The Terrans are simple. Their response to overwhelming force will follow predictable patterns of panic, collapse, and submission. They are irrelevant to the primary calculation. Focus your sensors on the Scourge. Begin a full spectrum recording. Log all combat data, weapon yields, and engine outputs. The Terrans' final transmissions may provide some minor insight into their primitive psychological state, but that is secondary. Lyra complied. Her appendages moved across the console with practiced efficiency. The axioms were clear. A superior force against an inferior one always yielded a predictable outcome. The Scourge were a known quantity of violence. The Terrans were a known quantity of weakness. The result was a foregone conclusion. As the first lances of plasma erupted from the lead Scourge destroyer and streaked toward the tiny Terran station, Lyra prepared to document the swift, orderly, and utterly predictable annihilation of a lesser species. The universe, after all, was a place of patterns. Aboard the Titan Helios relay station, the first plasma volley felt less like an impact and more like a fundamental law of physics being violated. Alarms shrieked, a chaotic counterpoint to the silent, brutal efficiency of the attack. Red lights bathed the command center in a hellish glow, reflecting off the grimly determined faces of the 30-person crew. Debris from a shattered solar array, once a gleaming petal of human achievement, tumbled past the main viewport. Shields at 34%, shouted Lieutenant Eris Thorne from the tactical console, his voice tight. They've targeted our primary power conduits. They know exactly where to hit us. Station Commander Eva Rostova gripped the command railing, her knuckles white. She was a veteran of the Proxima conflicts, a brutal civil war fought between human factions decades ago. She knew the cold calculus of facing a superior force. They expect us to panic, she said, her voice a blade cutting through the rising clamor. They expect us to break. We will do neither. She turned, her gaze sweeping over her bridge crew. A fire burned in her eyes that no alien observer could have predicted. This is not a drill. I am authorizing asymmetric response protocol. Chimera. You know your duties. Execute. A new sense of purpose, a cold and familiar fury, settled over the command center. The panicked energy was replaced by a focused, almost feral intensity. Chimera was a protocol born from humanity's long and bloody history of fighting itself. It was a playbook for when you were outgunned, outmatched, and had nothing left to lose but your own ingenuity. It was a strategy the Axiom Concordance, with their rigid logic, could never conceive of. Chief Engineer Miles Corbin's voice crackled over the comm from the bowels of the station. Rostova, my team is rerouting emergency power. We're going to vent atmosphere from Sector Gamma 7. It's a long shot, but if their boarders try to cut through that airlock, they'll get a nasty surprise in the form of explosive decompression. Make it happen, Miles, Rostova ordered. Comms, I want you to start broadcasting on every frequency. Don't send a distress call. Send everything. Old movie files, stock market data from a decade ago, audiobooks, static. Flood their channels with meaningless noise. Let's see how. Their hive mind handles information overload. Simultaneously, the station's exterior maintenance hatches hissed open. A swarm of small, spider-like drones, designed for routine repairs and asteroid deflection, scurried out into the void. They weren't weapons, but they had simple heat signatures and thrusters. They began moving in erratic patterns, flitting between the station and the debris field. The Scourge, programmed to prioritize any active threat, wasted several volleys of plasma on the worthless maintenance bots. This gave the station's remaining shields precious seconds to recharge from the bridge of the lead Scourge destroyer. The Hive commander processed the Terran response. The data was illogical. The primitives were venting their own life support. Their communications were a chaotic storm of useless information. Their automated systems were firing at random. The hive mind concluded this was not a strategy. It was a system-wide failure, the technological death throes of a species in panic. It was precisely what they expected. Then, a new contact appeared. A small, ungainly transport ship, the Stardust Drifter, detached from a civilian docking port. It was a freelance freighter that had been taking on supplies, and now it was caught in the attack. With its engines sputtering, it made a desperate run for the cover of Saturn's rings. The Scourge Hive commander dismissed it as an insignificant annoyance. It assigned one of its 3 destroyers to the task of swatting the fly. The destroyer peeled away from the main assault, its movements casual and arrogant. Its weapons began to power up, preparing to deliver a single, contemptuous shot that would obliterate the fleeing transport and its crew. It was a trivial matter, a footnote in another easy conquest. The Scourge destroyer closed on the Stardust Drifter. Its forward weapon ports glowed with malevolent energy. Aboard the Oracle, junior observer Lyra logged the impending kill as a statistical certainty. The freighter had no shields to speak of, its engines were sputtering, and its trajectory was clumsy. The axioms were clear. It was a foregone conclusion. High Arbiter, Lyra reported, her tone perfectly flat. The transport's destruction is imminent. Probability of survival, 0. As predicted, chimed Valerius, not even bothering to turn a facet toward the display. A pointless, emotional gesture of flight. Continue logging. But then, a new variable entered the equation. It was one so small and insignificant that Lyra's primary sensors had initially dismissed it as debris. A sliver of a ship, no larger than one of the Scourge's own attack drones, detached from a hidden docking bay on the dark side of the Terran station. It was the patrol cutter Stiletto, a vessel designed for customs inspections and short-range patrols, not combat. Anomaly detected, Lyra stated. A Terran secondary craft is on an intercept course with the Scourge destroyer. Valerius finally turned his full attention to the display. One patrol cutter? Against a destroyer? This is not panic. This is illogical. What is its weapons loadout? Negligible, Lyra reported after a quick scan. Standard light-duty plasma repeaters. One high-yield industrial mining laser. A mining laser? Valerius's internal structure resonated with what, in a lesser being, might be called confusion. They intend to fight a warship with a mining tool? This is absurd. Aboard the Stiletto, pilot officer Jet Rask grinned as he pushed the cutter's engines into the red. Commander Rostova, you sure about this? The Stiletto isn't exactly built for this kind of party. The plan doesn't require us to fight, Jet, Rostova's voice replied, crisp and clear over the comm. It requires you to be the best damn pilot in the system. Can you do that? You have to ask? Jet laughed, weaving his ship through the debris field with an artist's touch. Targeting computer is locked on Ice Cluster 7-3. It's rich in frozen volatiles, just like the survey said. You're not targeting the ship, you're targeting the asteroid. Lyra's voice chimed in the observation chamber of the Oracle. Her statement was a question. Valerius remained silent. His facets were fixed on the unfolding scene. He was processing a stream of possibilities that all seemed to violate Concordance doctrine. Fire on my mark, Jet, Rostova commanded. We get one shot at this. Jet lined up the shot. He ignored the warning klaxons that screamed as the Scourge destroyer finally registered him as a nuisance. It fired a warning shot that boiled the vacuum off his port side. Anytime now, Commander. The Scourge weapons charge cycled for the kill shot on the freighter. Mark, Rostova yelled. Jet slammed his thumb down on the firing stud. The Stiletto's mining laser, a tool designed to carefully carve mineral samples from asteroids, was not a subtle weapon. A thick, incandescent beam of pure thermal energy, far cruder than any plasma bolt, lanced across the void. It struck the ice-rich asteroid. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The asteroid didn't just break apart, it flash vaporized. Trillions of tons of frozen water, methane, and ammonia sublimated into a superheated gas cloud that expanded at explosive velocity. The solid rock of the asteroid itself, now superheated and unstable, shattered into a shotgun blast of hypervelocity shrapnel. The Scourge destroyer, caught completely by surprise, flew directly into the expanding maelstrom. The superheated steam flash boiled the surface of its hull. This blinded its external sensors and caused thermal shock across its armor plating. The storm of rock and ice fragments acted like a physical sandblaster, ripping through unshielded sensor arrays and exposed weapon emplacements. The warship, moments from an effortless kill, was suddenly blind, deaf, and being pummeled by a man-made nebula. Under the cover of the chaos, the Stardust drifter limped into the relative safety of Saturn's upper atmosphere. Aboard the Oracle, Lyra stared. Her logical mind struggled to categorize what she had just witnessed. They weaponized an asteroid, she stammered, with a mining tool. They sacrificed a patrol craft's position to save a non-combatant vessel. This does not compute. The action carries a 97% risk factor for a 3% gain in total species survivability. High Arbiter Valerius's crystalline form pulsed with a deep, discordant light. He was silent for a full 30 seconds. The whirring of his internal processors was the only sound in the chamber. He had just witnessed a species use inferior technology in a suicidal maneuver to achieve an objective that was, by all concordance metrics, strategically worthless. Lyra, he finally chimed, his voice stripped of its earlier condescension. Update the classification for this species. Category 3 Primordial is no longer accurate. He turned a single, gleaming facet toward his subordinate. Log the Terrans as a high-threat anomaly. Their actions are not governed by the axioms of predictable logic. They are governed by something else. Something we do not yet understand. The report from the Oracle rippled through the grand chamber of the Axiom Concordance. High Arbiter. Valerius's holographic form stood at the center of the circular chamber. His crystalline facets reflected the muted, sterile light. Around him, the senior arbiters of the Concordance processed his findings in perfect, unnerving silence. The data was irrefutable. A Category 3 species had used a non-weapon to disable a Category 5 Predator's warship in order to save a non-strategic asset. The act violated no fewer than 17 core axioms of predictable interstellar engagement. A high-threat anomaly is an insufficient classification, a new voice chimed. This one was not melodic, but sharp and percussive, like glass striking glass. It belonged to Strategos Thrax, the military head of the Concordance. His form was darker than the others, a smoky quartz color. His logic was forged not in abstract philosophy, but in the cold reality of fleet command. Predictability is the foundation of galactic stability. A species that operates outside the known logical frameworks is not an anomaly. It is a systemic risk. Their actions were not a threat to the Concordance. Valerius countered smoothly. They were directed solely at the Scourge. Today, they weaponize an asteroid against a pirate, Thrax retorted, his voice sharp with disdain for such primitive methods. Tomorrow, they might weaponize a moon against a trade convoy that displeases them. Their capacity for asymmetrical thought is a variable we cannot leave uncalculated. We require a full capability audit. An audit? Valerius pulsed with intellectual disapproval. Direct intervention would contaminate the data. We must continue to observe passively to gather a pure data set. Observation is no longer sufficient, Thrax declared, his authority resonating through the chamber. The Scourge will undoubtedly escalate. Their hive mind processes humiliation as a direct threat to the collective. A larger fleet is inevitable. I propose we allow this escalation to proceed. Let the Scourge apply overwhelming force. The Terran's response to an extinction-level event will provide us with the final data points we require. This will allow us to formulate a permanent containment protocol. A murmur of agreement chimed through the assembled arbiters. Thrax's logic was sound. The most efficient way to understand a variable was to subject it to extreme pressure and record the outcome. The vote was a mere formality. The Concordance would continue to watch, their sensors ready. The Terran's fight for survival would be the Concordance's final, most informative experiment. Aboard the Titan Helios station, the mood was anything but experimental. Commander Rostova watched the Sol System Defense Corps flagship, the Valiant, glide into a docking position. It was a true warship. Its hull was scarred from past conflicts. Its presence was a stark contrast to the scientific and civilian modules of her station. Fleet Marshal Ivan Petrov materialized on her command center's view screen. His face was a mask of grim resolve. Eva, your report was concise. What's the situation on the ground? The drifter got away clean, Ivan. We've patched the hull breaches. The crew is shaken, but they're determined. We know they'll be back, and they'll bring friends. Our long-range intelligence confirms it, Petrov said. A Scourge battle group has just changed course from the outer sectors. At least 10 capital ships. They'll be here in 48 hours. Rostova didn't flinch. She had expected it. The Valiant can't hold them off alone. My station is a sitting duck. You won't be alone for long, Petrov assured her. 3rd and 5th flotillas are en route. They'll rendezvous with us near Saturn in 36 hours. We'll make our stand in the rings. Rostova nodded, a slow, grim smile touching her lips. The rings. A chaotic mess of ice and rock that would confound the Scourge's rigid battle formations. It was a classic human strategy. If the battlefield doesn't suit you, choose a new one. The Shadowcat squadrons from the station are fueled and ready, Marshal. My pilots are itching for a fight. Good, Petrov said. Tell them they'll get one. The Scourge thinks we're a soft target. They think they're coming here to finish a job. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes hard as iron. They're not coming to finish a job, Eva. They're walking into a trap. The Scourge arrived not as a fleet, but as a judgment. 10 capital ships, each a mountain of jagged black armor and pulsing energy, tore through space-time. They were flanked by a swarm of smaller, faster destroyers. They moved in a perfect, crystalline lattice formation, a testament to the hive mind's flawless logic and singular purpose. Their target was the Titan Helios station, a tiny spark of light against the majestic backdrop of Saturn. They expected to extinguish it with mathematical precision. They did not expect the battlefield to choose them. Waiting for them, nestled within the shimmering, chaotic beauty of Saturn's rings, was the SDC's 3rd and 5th flotillas. Fleet Marshal Ivan Petrov watched from the command bridge of the Valiant as the enemy fleet entered the outermost ring. The sheer scale of the rings was breathtaking. A disk of countless ice chunks, moonlets, and dust, all grinding against each other in a silent, slow-motion ballet of cosmic proportions. It was a navigator's nightmare and a tactician's dream. They're maintaining formation, Marshal, his tactical officer reported. They're treating the rings like a minor environmental obstacle, not a tactical landscape. Petrov smiled thinly. Their logic is their weakness. They see the rings as a set of variables to be navigated. We see them as ammunition. He opened a channel to the station. Commander Rostova, your Shadow Cats are cleared for launch. Give him hell. From hidden bays within the Titan Helios station and the SDC carriers, 60 starfighters launched into the fray. The Shadow Cats were small, angular craft. They were over-engined and piloted by men and women who treated physics less like a set of laws and more like a list of suggestions. They didn't fly in formation. They scattered like buckshot, immediately using the massive ice chunks for cover. Aboard the Oracle, Lyra struggled to track the Terran fighters. Their movements were erratic, fluid, and utterly illogical. They are not adhering to any recognized attack patterns, she reported, her appendages flying across her console. They are using the ring debris for concealment. It is chaotic. High Arbiter Valerius watched, his form pulsing slowly. It is not chaos, Junior Observer. It is improvisation. Viper, 3. I've got a destroyer on my 6. A pilot's voice crackled over the squadron comms. Negative, Viper, 3. He's got you on his nose, corrected his wingman, Lieutenant Jia Merlin Lee. Break hard into that ice cluster. I'll give him something else to chew on. As the first pilot dove behind a kilometer-wide chunk of frozen ammonia, Merlin looped her fighter over a spinning moonlet. She deliberately fired a plasma burst not at the pursuing Scourge ship, but at a fragile ice formation in its path. The formation shattered, creating a dense cloud of glittering, razor-sharp shards. The Scourge destroyer, unable to divert its course in time, plowed through the cloud. Its shields flared as thousands of tiny impacts scoured its armor and blinded its forward sensors. The Scourge Hive Commander processed the data with cold fury. Its projections had accounted for the debris field, but not for an enemy that actively weaponized it. The Terran fighters were not engaging in standard dogfights. They were manipulating the environment, turning the rings themselves into a weapon. They used the shadows of larger moonlets to mask their approach. They bounced targeting lasers off reflective ice surfaces to create false signals. They treated the entire ring plane as a three-dimensional maze. Losses were mounting at a rate that defied the hive mind's calculations. Marshall, the Valiant's tactical officer, said, "The Scourge is adapting. They're dispatching wings of their own drone fighters to screen their capital ships." Took them long enough, Petrov grunted. They're trying to impose order on the chaos. Let's give them more chaos to deal with. He turned to his communications officer. Deploy the ghosts. From the cargo bays of 3 SDC frigates, dozens of small communications buoys were launched deep into the rings. They were simple devices, repurposed from their original function of creating a deep space relay network. Now, they began to broadcast. Each buoy emitted a ghost signal. It was a fake energy signature meticulously crafted to mimic a Terran. Capital ship, the Hive Commander, desperate to regain control of the battle, immediately registered the new contacts. Its logic was absolute. A capital ship was a higher priority target than a mere starfighter. It couldn't conceive of a species that would use decoys so brazenly. The command went out across the Scourge network. The fleet, which had been struggling to maintain its rigid formation, now broke apart. For capital ships and their destroyer escorts peeled off from the main force. They charged at full speed toward the ghost signals, eager to crush the primary threats. They found nothing but empty space and simple broadcast relays. But by the time they realized their error, it was too late. Their magnificent, unified formation was shattered. The Terran fleet, which had been fighting a defensive, harassing action, now saw its opportunity. All ships, converge and engage, Petrov ordered, his voice ringing with cold command. Target the isolated groups. Show them what happens when the pack gets broken. The human cruisers and destroyers surged forward from their concealed positions. What had been a chaotic skirmish of fighters now escalated into a full-scale fleet engagement. But it was no longer a battle of 10 capital ships against a handful of Terran vessels. It was now a series of smaller, isolated battles. And in these battles, the humans, with their superior coordination in the chaos and their unpredictable tactics, held a decisive advantage. The beautiful, logical lattice of the Scourge fleet had been undone, not by superior firepower, but by a handful of daredevil pilots, and a clever, low-tech trick. While the main SDC fleet engaged the scattered Scourge destroyers, the Corvette-class SDC Whisper slipped through the chaos like a stiletto in a brawl. On its bridge, there were no shouts and no alarms. There was only the quiet hum of the life support system and the low, tense voices of its 5-person crew. Captain Anya Sharma stood motionless. Her eyes were fixed on the forward viewport, which showed a maelstrom of plasma fire and tumbling ice. Every system on her ship that was not essential to stealth or movement was powered down. They were a ghost, deaf and blind to the larger battle, focused on a single, impossible task. Passing through the inky gap, Lieutenant Sakai, the navigator, whispered. His hands ghosted over his console. Debris density is increasing. 5 degrees to port to avoid that moonlet's wake. Sharma acknowledged with a slight nod. The Whisper was a prototype. It was a ship built not for brawling, but for infiltration. Its hull was coated in sensor-absorbent materials that were still wildly experimental. Its engines emitted a heat signature barely warmer than the cosmic background radiation. It was also fragile. A single direct hit from a Scourge plasma cannon would turn it into incandescent vapor. "We have a visual on the target," said Tactical Officer Kenji Tanaka. His voice was steady, but Sharma could see a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. On the main screen, the Scourge flagship, the Desolation, loomed into view. It was less a ship and more a mobile fortress. It was a city of jagged metal and glowing weapon emplacements. It made the Valiant look like a patrol boat, and they were going to fly right up to it. Aboard the Oracle, Strategos Thrax's smoky form pulsed with agitation. The Terran fleet is succeeding in breaking the Scourge formation, but their losses are mounting. The strategy is unsustainable. Where is this 6th capital ship signal? The buoys are reporting. High Arbiter Valerius zoomed the sensors in, past the main battle, toward the Scourge flagship. "There is no 6th ship," he chimed, a new, sharp frequency entering his tone. "There is only this." He highlighted a tiny distortion, a flicker in the sensor readings so faint it was statistically insignificant. A Corvette. It is flying directly toward their command vessel. What is its intent? It's a suicide run, Thrax concluded. A final, desperate act of defiance. Pointless. The Whisper shuddered as the wreckage of a Scourge drone, destroyed moments earlier by a Shadow Cat, tumbled past their cockpit. Sakai corrected their course without a word. They were now inside the flagship's point defense screen, a place no sane pilot would ever go, range to target. 500 meters, Tanaka reported, his fingers poised over his console. "We're in the sweet spot, Captain. Their close-range sensors can't track something this small and cold. Prepare to deploy the payload," Sharma ordered. "On my mark." "Payload," Thrax echoed from the Oracle's bridge. The vessel shows no torpedo tubes, no significant energy weapon signatures. What payload could it possibly carry that would affect a vessel of that scale? The Whisper's underbelly slid open, not with the aggressive snap of a weapons bay, but with the quiet hiss of a cargo dispenser. It didn't fire a missile or a torpedo. Instead, it released a dense, glittering cloud of what looked like dust. The cloud, containing millions of microscopic machines, drifted silently toward the flagship's hull. "Payload deployed," Tanaka confirmed, relief evident in his voice. "The corrosive mites are active and seeking targets." "Get us out of here, Sakai," Sharma said, her voice never rising above a whisper. The Whisper banked hard and accelerated, vanishing back into the chaos of the rings as silently as it had appeared. The mites, each no bigger than a grain of sand, landed on the hull of the Desolation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, they went to work. They weren't an explosive. They were an industrial tool, a technology reverse-engineered from machines designed for asteroid mining. Their sole purpose was to break down complex metallic and crystalline structures at a molecular level. That on the bridge of the Desolation, the Hive commander registered a series of minor, insignificant system errors. A sensor array on the port side went offline. A weapon emplacement failed to retract. An armor temperature warning flickered and died. It dismissed them as collateral damage from the ongoing battle, but the errors began to cascade. The failures were not random. They were spreading from the outside in. An entire section of point defense cannons seized up. The main communications spire, A massive antenna that connected the commander to its swarm began to droop as its structural supports were eaten away from within. The ship wasn't being attacked. It was developing a disease. The hive commander screeched in silent, psychic fury as it finally understood. A section of the main viewport cracked, not from an impact, but because the molecular bonds holding it together were dissolving. It watched as its own hull began to peel away in patches, not burning or exploding, but simply coming apart, reverting to dust. The psychic link to the rest of the Scourge fleet, the very thing that gave them their power, faltered. The commander's orders became garbled, then intermittent, then silent. The hive had been decapitated on the bridge of the Oracle. A stunned silence reigned. Lyra was the first to speak. They didn't destroy it. They disassembled it. Strategos Thrax's form was rigid. He had witnessed millennia of warfare. He had seen stars extinguished and planets cracked open. But he had never seen anything like this. This wasn't war. It was something else entirely. It was quiet, insidious, and utterly terrifying. Valerius's voice was a low, resonant chime that vibrated through the deck plates. Reevaluate, he commanded. His words were directed at the ship's master computer, at Lyra, at Thrax, at the entire concordance. Reevaluate everything. The decapitation of the Scourge command was not a clean kill. It was a lobotomy. With the hive commander silenced and the desolation drifting as a crumbling tomb, the rest of the Scourge fleet dissolved into madness. The flawless lattice formation, their greatest strength, became their undoing. Without the central consciousness to direct them, the individual ships reverted to primal instinct. Some continued to fire blindly into the rings. Others, registering their sister ships as the nearest active threat, turned on each other in a frenzy of fratricidal violence. Most simply fled, scattering in every direction with no coherent plan. Aboard the SDC Valiant, Fleet Marshal Ivan Petrov watched the enemy tear itself apart. The battle was won. All that remained was the cleanup. Marshal, his tactical officer, reported, "The remaining Scourge vessels are disorganized and vulnerable. We can encircle and eliminate them within the hour." The officer's voice was eager, anticipating the order for total annihilation. It was the logical, tactically sound conclusion to a decisive victory. Petrov shook his head. "No. Open a channel. All system broadcast." The officer paused, confused. "Sir, you heard me," Petrov said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Broadcast on all frequencies. Unencrypted." A moment later, Petrov's voice, calm and measured, echoed across the entire system. It reached the fleeing Scourge, the damaged Terran station, and the silent, listening post of the Oracle. "This is Fleet Marshal Ivan Petrov of the Sol System Defense Corps. The engagement is over. Your command structure has been neutralized. Cease all hostile actions immediately. Power down your weapon systems. You are permitted to retrieve your wounded and the crews of your disabled vessels. Once you have done so, you will withdraw from this system under our escort. Know this. If you ever threaten a Terran life or the lives of our allies again, we will not stop at disabling your flagship. We will erase you. You have been warned." The message ended. A profound silence fell over the battlefield. It was broken only by the quiet hiss of escaping atmosphere from crippled ships. Slowly, tentatively, the Scourge vessels that were still functional powered down their weapons. Small shuttlecraft began to emerge. They moved cautiously toward the shattered hulks of their sister ships, beginning the grim work of rescue. On the bridge of the Oracle, junior observer Lyra stared at her console, unable to process the data. "They are letting them go," she whispered. The words were a violation of the disciplined silence she was trained to maintain. "They have achieved total strategic dominance, yet they are permitting the enemy to recover and retreat. This contradicts axiom prime of warfare. A weakened threat must be eliminated to prevent its reconstitution." Strategos Thrax's smoky form vibrated with a fury so intense it seemed to warp the light around him. "Fools!" His voice hammered through the chamber. It was no longer sharp chimes, but a grating roar of disbelief. They held victory. Complete. And total victory. They could have dismantled the entire Scourge fleet, piece by piece. They could have studied their technology, erased their threat from this galactic quadrant forever. And instead, they warned them. They let them leave. He turned his form toward Valerius. "This is the fatal flaw. The illogical sentimentality. I predicted. Their capacity for asymmetric tactics is matched only by their sentimentality. They are not warriors. They are emotionally compromised primitives who have stumbled upon effective tricks. They cannot be reasoned with. They must be contained before this moral contagion can spread. High Arbiter Valerius did not respond immediately. He watched the main display. A Terran medical frigate was moving toward a heavily damaged Scourge destroyer, broadcasting offers of medical assistance. The Scourge, in their confusion, did not fire. It is not sentimentality. Valerius chimed at last, his tone a low, complex chord of deep thought. Then what is it? Thrax demanded. Strategic incompetence? A failure of will? I do not know, Valerius admitted. This statement silenced Thrax more effectively than any counterargument. An arbiter admitting ignorance was a momentous event. It could be a psychological tactic, an act of mercy so profound and unexpected it is designed to shatter the enemies. Will to fight far more effectively than destruction could. It could be a message, not to the Scourge, but to us. A demonstration that they operate on a level of strategy that incorporates principles we have long dismissed as inefficient. Valerius turned his facets to Thrax. You see a flaw? I see. Another variable that we do not understand. And any variable we do not understand is a potential threat. Their brutality is predictable. This, compassion, is not. It is the most dangerous thing we have witnessed today. The data feed to the Oracle shifted from the grand strategic view to small, intimate scenes. These scenes were, to the Concordance, even more illogical than the battle itself. The first feed was from the medical bay of the Titan Helios station. The rescued crew of the Stardust Drifter, a motley collection of 5 different non-Terran species, were being triaged. The Terran medic, his helmet retracted to show a kind, weary face, knelt before a small, furry Kthar child. The child's species was known for its extreme skittishness. The child was trembling, backed into a corner of the bay. The Terran didn't reach for it. He didn't try to restrain it. Instead, he simply sat on the floor a few meters away. He pulled out a small data slate and created a soft, chiming pattern of light on its surface. He made no sudden moves. His voice was a low, soothing murmur that the universal translator rendered as meaningless, gentle sounds. After several minutes, the child crept forward. Its fear was slowly being overpowered by curiosity. It tentatively touched the dancing light with one of its small paws. Aboard the Oracle, Lyra cross-referenced the action with all known databases. Behavioral pacification, she logged. Her own logic struggled to find a place for the data. The subject is employing non-threatening postures and sensory stimuli to reduce anxiety in a traumatized juvenile. The energy and time expenditure for this individual act is high, with no immediate strategic benefit to the Terran collective. The feed then switched to the brig of the SDC Valiant. It was not the dark, brutal dungeon the Concordance would have designed for maximum psychological pressure. It was brightly lit, sterile, and organized. Captured Scourge warriors, their jagged bodies and predatory limbs making them look utterly out of place in the clean environment, were being processed. They were not being tortured for information. They were being treated. One Scourge, its arm badly burned by plasma scoring, was strapped to a medical gurney. It snarled and thrashed as a Terran corpseman approached. The corpseman, a young woman, didn't flinch. She methodically applied a regenerative biofoam to the wound. The Scourge warriors spat a viscous, black fluid at her, which sizzled against her uniform sleeve. The woman simply wiped it off with a cloth and continued her work. Her movements were calm and efficient. They are tending to the wounds of their enemies. Strategos Thrax's voice grated. The percussive chimes were sharp with contempt. They are expending valuable medical resources on a species that, given the chance, would have flayed them alive. This is not a strategy. It is a sickness, a profound, systemic weakness. If this is the nature of their species, they can be broken. Their compassion can be turned against them. The feed zoomed in on another cell. A Terran officer was attempting to communicate with a captured Scourge lieutenant. The Scourge refused to respond. Its psychic presence was a wall of silent, simmering hatred. The Terran officer simply left a container of nutrient paste and a pouch of clean water, then retreated without a word. Or, High Arbiter Valerius chimed, his tone now holding a note of awe that bordered on fear. It is a strength so advanced. We lack the axioms to comprehend it. Thrax swiveled his smoky form toward the Arbiter. Explain that absurdity. You assume their goal is the same as ours. The complete neutralization of a threat, Valerius explained. What if their goal is different? What if they seek not to neutralize the scourge, but to change them? An act of unexpected mercy can be a more potent psychological weapon than a plasma cannon. It introduces a variable, doubt, confusion, even a flicker of respect, into a mind that has only ever known brutality. It is an infection of an idea. He gestured to the screen showing the medic calming the frightened child. They expend resources to save the young of other species. They expend resources to heal their captured enemies. They are building a reputation. They are demonstrating that their compassion is as boundless as their tactical brutality. Any species watching this, any civilization that might one day find itself at odds with the Terrans, must now ask themselves a question. Do we wish to face the warriors who can weaponize an asteroid? Or do we wish to appeal to the people who will sit on the floor to calm a frightened child? Valerius fell silent, letting his words resonate in the chamber. The axioms of the concordance were built on the predictable logic of power, threat, and elimination. But the Terrans operated on a different system entirely. They were proving, seen by agonizingly illogical scene, that there was more than one way to win a war. And the most effective victories, perhaps, were the ones won after the fighting was over. High Arbiter Valerius stood before the Grand Chamber. The holographic projections of the senior arbiters formed a perfect, silent circle around him. The complete data logs from the Sol system engagement had been processed, cross-referenced, and analyzed against every axiom in the Concordance's vast library of galactic knowledge. The results were not just inconclusive. They were contradictory. They were impossible. The audit is complete, Valerius began. His chimes resonated with a gravity the chamber had not heard in a millennium. Our initial classification of the Terrans as a category, 3 primordial species, was not merely an error. It was a failure of the axioms themselves. Strategos Thrax pulsed with dark energy. A failure of logic? Impossible. The data is clear. They are emotionally compromised. Their tactics are erratic, and their mercy is a liability. They are a flawed species that poses a manageable threat if we exploit their weaknesses. You are correct, Strategos, that they are flawed, Valerius conceded, turning a facet toward the military commander. But you have failed to grasp the nature of their flaws. We observed them venting their own atmosphere. A flaw in self-preservation, yes? But it created a weapon where none existed. We observed them using non-military tools for combat. A flaw in technological doctrine? Yet it proved brutally effective. We observed them showing mercy to a defeated foe. A flaw in strategic finality? Yet it has sown more confusion among our enemies and allies than an entire fleet ever could. He paused, letting the chamber process his words. We have always believed that technological development is a linear path. A species progresses from kinetic weapons to energy, from atmospheric flight to interstellar travel. We classify civilizations based on their position on this path. The Terrans do not follow this path. They do not discard old tools when they develop new ones. They add them to their collection. They will use a kinetic railgun alongside a plasma cannon. They will use a chemical explosive to propel a swarm of microscopic, self-replicating machines. They do not see technology as a ladder to be climbed, but as a toolbox to be filled. They will use a hammer just as readily as a sonic driver if it is the right tool for the job. Valerius's form began to pulse with a brilliant, intense light. We assumed their greatest strength would be their most advanced weapon. We were wrong. Their greatest strength is a philosophy, a belief that anything can be a weapon. An asteroid, the atmosphere, a mining tool, information, mercy. He turned his form to face the entire council. We cannot predict them. We cannot calculate their response, because it is not based on the universal axioms of logic that govern all other known species. They do not ask, what is the most efficient course of action? They ask, what is the most unexpected course of action? They cultivate chaos. They thrive in it, and they wield it with terrifying purpose. Strategos Thrax remained rigid, but a new frequency of uncertainty emanated from his form. Therefore, Valerius concluded, his voice ringing with the force of an undeniable truth. I propose we do not create a containment protocol. You cannot contain a species that perceives every wall as a potential weapon. Instead, I propose a new classification. A classification for a species so dangerously unpredictable, so fundamentally at odds with the logical nature of the universe, that it must be treated as a force of nature itself. We cannot place them on our scale of primordial to advanced. We must create a new scale entirely. A data slate materialized in front of each arbiter. On it, a single proposal was displayed. The species classification for Terran was to be updated. The new designation was Axiom Inverter. Its threat level was deemed incalculable. The new directive was simple. Avoid provocation at all costs. Observe and adapt. Do not engage. The chamber was silent. There was no debate. There was no discussion. The logic, in its own terrifying way, was absolute. One by one, the arbiters chimed their assent. High Arbiter Valerius watched the vote confirm. Then he turned his gaze back to the main display, which now showed a live feed of Earth. It was a serene, blue and white marble, looking so peaceful, so primitive, so utterly deceptive. The balance of power in the galaxy had not just shifted, it had been inverted.